I'm Paweł Zdziech, and today I would like to talk about trends in IT. Why trends are important in planning your career? Well, just a simple example, if you get engaged in a technology that is on the wane, that is decreasing in importance, then a few years down the road you may find yourself in a bit of a trouble if the technology is really declining. So that's just one example of why trends are worth observing, are worth watching. I invited a special guest. He's a special guest for me because so far I've known him only from his blog, only from the internet. So today is the first time I'm meeting him. He's Sebastian Gemski.
Hello, Paweł. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation.
Hi, Sebastian. He started out his IT career around 20 years ago,
Almost
right?
20 years, yes, exactly.
Yeah. You began as a developer,
Precisely.
Then you were analyst, architect.
All kind of flavors for an IT specialist, for someone who makes for a living from creating software products.
So let's move to the main topic of our today's conversation, the trends. Are you a devoted follower of IT trends or trends in software development?
I have my own preferences, of course, like I think every engineer has. But they pay me to be very pragmatic. So they don't pay me to chase the bunnies, to chase the latest names, the most sexy names on the internet. So I have to take all the factors under consideration and to make wise choices, not only regarding what kind of technology is popular these days, but also what would be the most valuable choice long term.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what do you think generally about this Stack Overflow recent survey, the one that Stack Overflow did? They asked, as far as I remember, 65,000 developers globally. They produced a big report that they put out some May this year. So what were your first thoughts after reading the report?
It was not like I found any particular epiphany in that. So of course I usually track it every year just to find out what's happening, what are the changes through all the time. But this kind of surveys and report is very interesting because our industry is a new industry and it's very dynamic. It changes a lot. So of course you can get answers to some of the questions, but still we have to remember that it's just the representation, the tiny representation of the whole community, which is very diverse. Mm-hmm. The community is diverse not only because people have different aspirations, they work for different companies, they have different priorities, they work with very different technologies, which sometimes diverge in very different areas. Mm-hmm. But also, even the geographical distribution, it also makes a big impact on the outcome of this whole survey. So I can tell that I have like one particular conclusion out of this year's edition, but it's in general very interesting to trace how does the changes distribute over the years.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's get into more details.
Right.
First, the most loved languages, and the most loved are defined in this survey as the languages that are used and those who use them would prefer to use them, would still like to use them. And the clear leader is Rust.
No surprise if you ask me.
For the fourth time in a row, it's the leader of the survey, the most loved language. What's so cool about Rust as a language?
I think some people have very different answers to this question. Some find the expressiveness of the language as a huge advantage, and I would confirm that in my case, it was also one of the reasons why I've got so interested in this. The other reason is the general performance. Rust is very, very highly performant, and not just in terms of concurrency, but also just in terms of execution, of single-thread execution. The other thing is that I think that the world of programmers was waiting for a very nice and high DX, high developer experience system programming language for many, many, many years. And because everyone knows C, C++, but the disadvantages, the drawbacks of C and C++ are also well known. So the community was looking for some kind of substitution. Some thought that maybe Golang will be this substitution, but the principles which are behind the development and design of Golang are quite different. And there are some aspects, some abilities of Golang which are quite controversial. For instance, how does it manage the memory and so on. So it's not a typical for a system language, the programming language, to deal with these problems the way Golang does. So Rust has some answers. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that Rust was designed in a very, very modern way. So like the language comes with everything packaged, so you don't have to like worry about missing things. For instance, about the toolset, the tool chain, and basic needs like formatting, or for instance, tools to unit test stuff. So this is all packaged in. So it's like pretty much you take it, you use it, and it's like a complete experience. And of course, there are some drawbacks. But still, for many people who, for instance, still use C and C++, because these are still very, very popular languages, they kind of dream about going into this area. They dream about moving to Rust. And if you check the actual usage of this language, it's not adopted that much yet. So I think that in many cases, it's more about I would like to, and I use this language in my private, I would say, scenarios, but there are people who do not use it in the actual professional scenarios.
Mm-hmm. So what's your prediction? Will the language become the next big thing like Java or C# in the next 5 or 10
It's
years?
hard to say at this point. It really depends on how does the overall development of the language goes from now on. For instance, I found some kind of similarity between the current state of Rust and the state of Scala, I would say 8 or 5 years ago. But then the design decisions in the Scala community, I think that they went kind of not in the way people expected them to go. And at this point, there are dire consequences of this fact. Mm-hmm. So I think that Rust has its potential, but the problem is the actual, I would say, steep learning curve. So the entry threshold to actually adopt this language is quite high. Will this be a problem? I think so, because right now the most popular languages are the most approachable ones. Mm-hmm. And Rust is not that approachable, that's for sure.
Okay, thank you. The next interesting category when it comes to languages is the most wanted languages. And these are defined as the languages that are not used by respondents, but the language that they would like to start using. And here the clear leader, and for, again, a few years now, is Python. You think, is it deserved position as a leader of these wanted languages?
I think it's about versatility, that in case of Python, it can be used for so many purposes, especially all those super interesting and super attractive positions related to data science and machine learning. Mm-hmm. So people know that this is getting very, very trendy, and that there's a huge demand for specialists in this particular category, and they would like to use this opportunity, for instance, not even just to completely change their career, but sometimes just to diversify, sometimes just to have, an alternative path or something like this. And well, Python in the end is known as very approachable, very easy to learn. So it's not, they don't perceive it as a huge investment, maybe a potential waste of time. If I don't use it in practice, maybe I will waste like some months of development and so on. So for many people, it's just like an adventure. That why not? If I'm looking for an alternative scenario, why not try Python? There are so many options, and then I can, for instance, specialize in this, and this. So I'm not really surprised. I'm actually glad, because, for instance, we are hiring Python developers. So I'm really glad that Python gets more and more popular. But in general, I think that it's mainly because of the popularity of data science.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this is what I noticed. As Python is quite popular in the job boards, there are a lot of offers for Python developers. There are not so many, there are very few offers actually for Rust developers.
True. I would say that in very specialized communities, in very narrow communities, which are focused, for instance, on some niche development, kinds of development, like developing the distributed backends for huge scalable systems, but doing it on a very, very low level, not using the typical distributed processing frameworks for some very, very sophisticated scenarios like online gaming or some other near real-time systems where, for instance, the performance is critical and the problems like the way garbage collector, for instance, stops the world is a huge issue in terms of the overall system performance.
Do you think in any time in the future Python there will be possible to write a big banking system in Python like today? Because today in sectors like the big sectors like financial sector, pharmaceutical, telecommunication, the big things are written in Java or C# most of the time.
I think that modern systems are much more componentized than before. So I don't think that anyone would risk building like a whole banking system in Python. I think that there are some things that are probably Python would be a preferable choice. For instance, all these components and parts where you are dealing with data, then it really makes sense to use Python. But if you are building, for instance, a high-performant, heavy data-oriented, but heavy transactional parts of the code, I would say that there are better choices, probably better choices.
Okay. There is this category of dreaded languages, which are the ones who are used, but the users would prefer to not use them anymore. And here, Visual Basic for applications, the leader, Objective-C, Perl. Well, Perl is an interesting example because according to the data, although it is one of the most dreaded languages, it is the best paid. Like the users of Perl earn a lot of money. Why is that?
Have you used Perl? Have you written anything in Perl?
No, the only language that I've written anything is Python.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did in Perl 5. So there are like two questions: why it's so dreaded and why it's so highly paid. So it's dreaded because I would like risk a very, very maybe risky statement that Perl is a great language if you have to hack something, write something very, very quickly, because it's so super powerful in terms of the construct, syntactic sugar. So you can sometimes stash a lot of logic in a very, very short code. The problem is that 2 weeks after that, you are not able to read your own code. Because there are so many things to actually do something in Perl. It has introduced some crazy ideas like the default variable. So you don't have to use the variable because it assumes that the variable is already there. So it's so mind-bending that at some point, if you overuse such constructs, it's just pretty much not possible to comprehend what you've created personally, what you've personally created. Why it's paid so well? Well, probably because there was so much code created in Perl a long time ago, and this code still persists. There has to be someone who actually maintains this, and sometimes adds a feature, develops changes, updates, and there has to be someone doing this. Because, for instance, even reverse engineering this business logic to rewrite it completely sometimes is a huge challenge. So I think it's exactly the same case like with COBOL development. That there has to be someone, you have to convince this person by paying a lot of money to actually touch this stuff which is 20 or 25 years old.
Yeah, COBOL is never gonna die. There are plenty of languages. The whole ranking consists of something like 25 languages. There are a lot of them, and it may be a little confusing for an IT graduate today to choose his language of the language that he would start out, or a couple of languages. Because to learn languages is to invest time, which may not bring the expected value in terms of project satisfaction or money. Was it easier 20 years ago when you were starting your career as a developer? Was it easier then to choose a language, or maybe there was no choice, you had to pick C# or something else?
Actually, I know that 20 years is plenty of time, but even then there were plenty of languages. I remember that while I was at the university, I was actually learning how to code in Prolog, how to learn to code in Lisp and so on. So there were already plenty of choices. And for instance, I remember that some of my colleagues who studied on the same year in the same group, they've actually, for instance, picked Erlang as their main technology. And they use Erlang until this very day.
Wow.
So is it easier or is it harder? I think that it's pretty much comparable. If I have to give an advice for a person who is just starting in this industry, I would say that start with something which is mainstream, probably one of the 5 most popular languages. I think that it's more important to identify your overall niche, like whether you would like to work with backend, frontend. What do you like in this general industry? So do you like something that is visual, or maybe you like algorithms and you treat them as riddles to be solved, or maybe you'd like getting insights out of the data. I think this is more important, to set the general direction, and then once you are, I would say, somehow oriented what's most interesting for yourself personally, then just go with one of the top 3 or top 5 languages. Probably try them all, go for some kind of tutorial, see what resonates with you, invest some time, and even if in the end you will decide to go with something else, you will probably learn something. You will at least learn why you've decided to pick something else. For me, it was always a lot of fun to learn new languages, just to, I would say, extend my thinking space and identify all the potential solutions language designers have used to give this huge cognitive power to the developers, to the designers, to give all this expressive power to the people who craft the code.
Mm-hmm. So if you were your former self 20 years ago, what 3 languages would you choose as your first languages to learn? Just pick 3.
I think that my main choice was between Java and C++. But these were the times when .NET was taking off. Mm-hmm. I think that in 1999 I started working on .NET Beta 2. So the C# 1.0 was already present, and it kind of resonated with me as well. So I've already started playing with that. So I would say that if you're asking about 3, it would be Java, C++, and C# even at this point.
Mm-hmm. Coming back to these most dreaded languages or technologies, what are your impressions from interviewing developers to your teams? What are the things that developers dread these days when it comes to technology, languages?
No, there are plenty of things, and I think that these do not change that much over the years. So of course, developers do not like reading someone else's code. For many people, it's because of the different mental models, but they call it usually, it's a technical debt, it's something that was written not very well. So in general, people do not like what they call maintenance. They do not like spending time on the stuff which was already created by someone, and right now you just propose some tiny adjustments. The other thing people are afraid of is using data technology which is not getting any traction in the market. So you've mentioned VBA or Visual Basic in general. So I think that these are quite good examples here. I think that the other things which are related to the technology, which are dreaded by the developers, are when they are completely not in charge of making any technical decisions. Mm-hmm. So when they are just told, for instance, this is the list of your tasks, you have to use this library, this library, this library, and maybe this is a template for you, so use this just to copy and paste, fill with some additional values, and this is your typical day of work. So they don't like to be, many of them don't like to be treated like task makers or task pushers, which do very, very repetitive work. Mm-hmm. This is somehow interesting, I would say, because when people, for instance, attend their computer science classes at university or something, they have a very, very interesting way of thinking about this kind of job, that every day will be completely unique, that every day you will be facing completely different challenges. That every day will be like a super adventure. You will be like Indiana Jones of code. You will move mountains. You will create whole cities and so on. And then they are afraid that they will waste their best time, the best time of their career, somewhere where these super interesting options are not offered. So somewhere where they will be paid just to maintain stuff. So I think that this is the greatest fear, at least in terms of technology or technological choices.
Mm-hmm. You touched on the topic of having an influence on what's going on in a company, in a project, in technologies. And the guys from Stack Overflow, they asked this year, I think for the first time, they asked how much of an influence a developer has on the purchasing decisions in their own companies. And the statistics was that 43% of developers have little or no influence on what technology is purchased by their organizations. Is it much or is it little? 33% of developers having no influence at all.
It's a tricky question because it's a perception. It's their perception. For instance, if you ask me about how do I approach this particular topic when I deal with my teams, for me, the autonomy to make a decision always comes with the accountability. So taking the responsibility for your decision. So for instance, if I have some kind of an agreement with my team that they take responsibility for the consequences of their choice, then I can let them make this decision. Mm-hmm. Of course, I will start with setting up the expectations. So pick any technology you want, but here are the goals you have to meet, and here is how I will verify that, or how we will verify that. And then, of course, there's always some kind of a consideration, especially when it comes to the price, especially when it comes to costly decisions and so on. So they still have to somehow sell it to me, but we make these decisions together based on their proposals, and the verification criteria are whether this technology meets the goals which were defined before. So many people can, referring to this question you've mentioned, many people can actually state that they do not make these decisions just because they do not take this accountability, for instance. Because from someone's perspective, they just may want to try React when there is completely no justification for that. They would like to try React because React is interesting, they've seen React presentation and so on. But from the company's perspective, what if your main expertise is Angular and everyone is using Angular? Mm. So in this particular case, there has to be some kind of reason. There have to be some pros and cons consideration to make proper and reasonable decisions, taking all the aspects under consideration.
Mm. I'm a reader of your blog. By the way, I highly recommend this blog to everyone in IT and HR because there are many interesting insights on managing teams, on software engineering, of course, on leadership. So No Kill Switch, Sebastian Gemski, that's a fantastic read. And the style of writing is very clear. I really like it.
Thank you very much.
And from this blog, I perceive you as a very pragmatic manager, a manager who is not, or a technologist, someone who is not easily influenced by the hype over technologies, methodologies, like Scrum. I know that you're not a super fan of Scrum. So looking at this rankings of most loved or most wanted languages, is there any languages or any frameworks that today get a lot of more hype than deserved, in your opinion? Anything, technologies, methodologies, philosophy?
I wouldn't risk such a statement. Do you know the theory of the hype cycle?
Oh yeah.
So yes, so I think that every technology is prone to this curve of the hype cycle. So it usually starts with some peak of hype, then there is some kind of disillusionment, and finally at the end there is a plateau of productivity, which usually is a lot lower than the actual level of the peak hype. So of course for different technologies there is different kind of hype, different level of hype, and this whole hype cycle also spans across a longer or shorter period of time. And it's really hard to say which technologies are more hyped than other ones, because it really depends on the scenario. Some technologies perfectly fit some scenarios, but for other scenarios, they do not really make any sense. In some cases, for instance, if I had to create a new company which creates the new product, I would probably not start with Django as a web framework, but for instance, imagine that your company is already using Python, because Django is using Python, and you are creating a web API or a web application as an additional product. So if you already have this Python expertise in your organization, why don't use Django? Then in this situation, Django would be a perfect and very sensible solution. So I wouldn't really discredit any technologies just based on hype. For instance, one of the most criticized databases, one of the most overhyped databases was probably on the internet was Mongo. But I've met already so many companies which actually praise Mongo based on their production use that, well, it worked for them. It solved their problems, and they use it for years, and they actually do not complain. So I would say that the best answer to this question is that it's really highly contextual. So use what really fits your scenario. Assess the technical expertise you already have on board. Try things, don't be afraid of trying things, but don't spawn 10 experiments in the same time. Just a limited number of experiments, 2 or 3. Use very clear criteria how to evaluate these experiments. Make it time bound. So don't make an experiment lasting like forever, but have a very, very clear expectations of what you would like to measure and how you would like to assess that. And this is the way to pick technology. In IT in general, but not only in IT, it's usually better to make decisions very, very quickly, but do not make them really permanent. If you have them to make a decision you already know it will be permanent, then it's a completely different kind of story. But I would say that one of the worst things when building software products is being very, very afraid of making decisions.
One of the most interesting findings for me in the whole survey was that 1/3 of programmers learn new technology every couple of months. For me, it was very surprising in a positive way, because I've spent years talking to programmers and during recruitment interviews, but my experience was different. My experience that most programmers are actually more or less stuck in not learning.
Well, you know, it was a survey, so they may have completely different things on their mind when they answer that they learn something. For some people, learning, maybe just trying the tutorial or reading an article, are going through like the initially, let's say, Pluralsight course or something like this, no product placement. And for other people, it may be really going deeply through stuff and truly learning what's behind what's under the hood. I'm not really that surprised with the number you've mentioned, because in general, the first thing is that this industry evolves quickly. So being a front-end engineer, the new frameworks keep popping up. And in many cases, even if you don't want to switch, that some kind of tooling element may just get abandoned and replaced by completely different technology. I think everyone remembers the story about the Grunt, Gulp, Webpack, and so on, and how those things change quickly. But it's not only that, it's not only an issue with the front end. Even if you are a backend developer, you really want to understand what's going on in the market because you want to be market relevant. Then you, for instance, looking at the job market like Warsaw, there are more and more companies entering the market and they always bring something new. not only in terms of technology, but sometimes in terms of an approach to product development and how they are organized and their organizational culture and so on. So people want to be prepared. You will never know when the opportunity strikes. So you want to be prepared. You want to be, probably you know this model of expertise. So there are I people, there are T people, there are E people. So many people who are highly aware, who consciously build their own career, they already know that it's good to have some options. I would say that it's not a wasted time, even if you've learned something which you are not using on a daily basis.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes even not mastering a technology, but being able to program a few lines makes a difference for a program.
Exactly.
Now the topic of happiness or life satisfaction or professional satisfaction. 2/3 of programmers surveyed, exactly, it was 63% are either very satisfied or highly satisfied with their jobs. Is it accurate? What's your reading on it?
So that's the moment when I'm getting more controversial. I think that the reason why so many people declare that they are satisfied is that it's an employee market right now. So it means that the difference, the disproportion between the supply, so how many developers are available, and the demand, so how many open positions remain, is so huge that the employers do anything they can to attract the employee. Right now, if you are dissatisfied with your current position, it's so easy just to change your job interest tick on LinkedIn, and you will get 20 offers in like 20 minutes. And then you are probably already tired with browsing through the offers in 30 minutes. So in 20 minutes, you've already picked your next employer. Of course, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but these days, it's a fact that these days, if you are dissatisfied, it's very easy to actually change jobs unless you've done some pick what is really beneficial for your company and use it in a smart way without getting distracted with all the technological buzzwords. This is already a hard skill. So I would say that there's a huge demand and there are plenty of people entering this market, but this is, for instance, the reason why technologies like Docker and especially Kubernetes or service meshes like Istio get so much criticizing these days, just because they introduce huge amount of complexity and there are not that many people who are already ready to tackle this complexity. So this is the main reason why these particular positions are really paid that well.
The outlier, but downwards, were mobile developers. It surprised me a little because I thought that mobile developers earn more or less the same as other kinds of developers, like front-end developers or back-end or full stack, that they are roughly equally paid. Here in this survey, mobile developers were underpaid. Is that something that agrees with your experience, your perception?
I'm not sure I can give any reasonable reasoning for this fact. Maybe it's the fact that it's just a representative group of developers who've participated in the survey. But in general, I don't see any particular reasons why this particular specialty would be graded higher or lower in terms of salary, to be honest.
The other thing that struck me quite a little was a disproportion between the salaries of engineering managers and regular developers, for example, full-stack developers. Here in this survey, which was a global survey, so for the whole global population of IT people, developers and managers of developers, engineering managers earned nearly twice as much as full-stack developers, which is contrary to my experience from the Polish market, where managers do not earn so much more than regular developers.
It's a very good question, and actually as another controversial topic. So in general, I think that there is a paradigm of a modern engineering manager which comes from the Silicon Valley and from the highly successful companies. This kind of engineering manager is not the line manager, is not the project manager, is not a person who is just managing and who is technology agnostic, it's not a boss. Usually it's a past engineer, a technology person who is still technologically relevant, but this person does not create value by himself or herself, but he is the leverage factor for others. So he works like as a multiplier for the whole team. For instance, he's a way the organization cultivates engineering culture, its organizational culture. It's the person who is some kind of the reference point, a role model for other engineers. It's the person who represents the vision of a CTO or a VP of engineering. It's the person who, for instance, builds the team, develops the team, and helps other engineers grow. It's the person who does not take the full control. It's the person who helps others flourish. There's a particular group of individuals who get quite verbose on the internet, who represent this value. For instance, like Will Larson, like Lara Hogan, like Camille Fournier. These are, I would say, exemplifications of what modern engineering manager is. And when it comes to the observations you've mentioned regarding Poland, my observation is that there are not that many people who actually can, I would say, represent this kind of career. There are not that many past, previous, or experienced engineers who pick this particular role of being a technical manager who is not an expert in Excel or in spreadsheet or in presentations, but who is still a technology person, but the person who is a multiplier factor, who is a leverage for all the other engineers. So my general observation is that it's not that, I would say that looking generally, not just in Poland, but it's not that their salaries go so high, so steeply high, but still there's a huge appreciation of the proper engineering leadership in the industry. Just because an individual developer, an individual engineer can create a lot of value, but there has to be someone to learn from. There has to be a mentor. There has to be someone to give a proper feedback. Sometimes when we start our career, we believe strongly in ourselves, that we already know everything. We've learned C++, C#, we already know all the design patterns, we've read the DDD book, we know everything. We, for instance, know event sourcing, so right now there are no mysteries in this world for us. But the problem is that usually there's a lot that comes with the experience. When we face particular situations and we learn how to behave, how to deal with the with people, because it's not just about the technology, but with people, with cooperation, with communication, with making pragmatic decisions, with prioritizing. And I don't just mean the feature prioritizing, but general prioritizing decisions based on the bigger value. Then we truly become true engineers who actually can make a proper difference. So this is why this engineering management, the engineering manager, as like another step, another kind of profile, it makes a lot of sense, and it helps organizations to scale. Because of course it would be great to have all the teams self-organizing on the same level, completely flat, and things just happening magically because everyone is so super engaged. But as practice tells us, as the reality tells us, they have to be leaders. Without leaders, it's really hard to make things going forth.
Yeah, you've led teams of up to 100 developers, as far as I remember from your LinkedIn profile.
It really depends, because sometimes you just lead them like it's a general leadership in terms of all the dimensions only of leadership. And I would say that, like, personally, I was a leader of teams up to 70 people or something like this. But I've also participated even in projects which, where I was, for instance, responsible for the technological aspects of 350-person projects. So, but this was just the responsibility, for instance, for the architecture, for the technological part, not, for instance, for the product part.
Most developers, and by most I mean 75%, work less than 45 hours a week. So it seems like there is a work-life balance in the life of a average developer in the world? What do you think?
It's another controversial topic, and probably I will get criticized for what I say here, but I think that looking at this particular topic and just trying to calculate the hours and making some conclusions based on that, it won't work. Because it's a hell of a difference depending on whether you consider yourself being paid for the time spent or being paid for the effects of your work. It's like a completely different perception. If you think that you're just compensated for the time you spend somewhere, okay, it's a completely valid point for many people. It's fine that you're looking for the work-life balance, looking at how many hours you've spent in your work. But if your personal goals are completely aligned with what you do professionally, if you fulfill yourself by your work, if you, for instance, have a skin in the game, so if you personally benefit because your company benefits, then it's not a factor. In many of my jobs, I didn't even count the hours. I didn't really care, just because I thought that even if I spend more hours than these 40 hours, which is just the number out of thin air, right? Even if I spend more, I knew that it's some kind of investment in my skill set, in my team, in the product, and I will benefit somehow. Maybe because I will be better, maybe because I will be more known, maybe because I will financially benefit out of it because the product will be more successful and my shares will be valued higher. So there are very different people who differently approach this particular topic. For instance, there are service companies and there are product companies. In service company, especially when you sell your service to the other company, there's a clear contract or maybe a time and material contract, so it makes sense to approach this just looking at the hours. But if you have this intrapreneurial spirit, if you work for yourself, if you think that you work for yourself, then it's this metric, it's a vanity metric, it's meaningless. Of course, you can accuse me that I'm trying to brainwash you, that I'm trying to, I don't know, convince someone that working overtime makes all of the sense. Because right now the term workaholic has its own meaning, so people usually would not like to be called workaholics. But if you think this way, think about people like Cristiano Ronaldo. This is the person who is really admired. This is some kind of a top-notch, top-level sportsman who represents, I would say, the top quality in the discipline of sport he performs. But is he a workaholic? Probably he is. I've heard that he makes like 10,000 push-ups per day or something like this. He doesn't miss training any particular day. So he's a workaholic, right? He could spend this time, I don't know, maybe reading a book or going somewhere else. But what he does is really aligned with his priorities. He's a maniac of hard work, but this was his particular personal deliberate decision to commit himself into this. It was not just the talent. It was a lot of work that had to be involved to actually succeed. So there are developers, for instance, who are not the task pushers, who are not the task-based, who are goal-based, who want to achieve something, to build a product, and for them, this time metric is not that relevant.
Okay, so you are probably an advocate of this new HR term, work-life integration, instead of work-life balance. There is this new division in an HR world that work-life balance is ended, now we have work-life integration.
I'm not sure I would phrase it like this. I would say that it's just the individual choice. So everyone should tell for his or herself. So I would not push anyone, for instance, to go and work longer and so on. But when I recruit people, when I build a team, what I enforce, it's a very strong word, what I enforce is that we all have the same, I call it social contract. So we are working here in the same team, within the same team, for the same reasons, and we have the same aspirations. So we are able to sacrifice to the very similar level. So no one feels cheated. And I strongly believe in this skin in the game paradigm, that we really care about work where we benefit proportionally to the way the company benefits out of our work. So I think that it's really individual. It really depends on the particular person, and this person should be able to somehow tell how much he or she wants to sacrifice. But I want to have a clear answer, how much you want to sacrifice. And then we can build a team of a well-aligned people who have the same priorities, who have the same sacrificial threshold. And then I believe that this team can really perform on the equal rules, on the equal rule set in a very fair way.
So let's say you have a 5-person team and 4 of them are really determined to stay overtime, to stay after
Hours.
8 p.m. And the one, not really. He prefers to spend 8 hours because he has, I don't know, family, hobbies, passions. Well, how would you handle this situation? Because this one would clearly be separate in a team.
And the main question is, what does the team think about it? Is the team fine with that? Because sometimes this person would deliver a lot of value, but there's a question, in the end, you are picking up the fruit, right? The fruits of your work, the effects of your work. So do we have a clarity of how we would like to split the share and how we would like to assess ourselves, how we would like to deal with the typical even just the reliability, that for instance, can these people cooperate? Because these work for 10 hours or something, and maybe they will need his or her support later, after hours. So can they handle this situation? Is it fine for them or not? Usually, in the majority of cases, it's not possible to handle it in a sensible way. And then probably it's better to realign people, to swap teams, to reorganize them, and to make sure that they have similar priorities and they have the similar approach to what they want to achieve and how they want to achieve it.
And what do you make of these passionate developers who have their side projects, after hours projects, and they're so passionate about them that they spend 18 hours a day on programming and the remaining 6 hours on sleep? So is it a valuable asset for you in a team?
Yeah, I think so. I've mentioned that it's good to make sure that individuals' priorities and passions and motivations are aligned with company's goals. So if this particular person, his passions or her passions are completely different and they are not aligned, then probably there is some kind of waste somewhere there. But if they're aligned and there is some kind of good influence in the organization, and if we can come up with a creative way of how to use this passion to make the company's goals or project goals or whatever more achievable just by utilizing this passion, then it's a great deal. So it's really good to truly recognize and understand the priorities and what is important for the particular person, what turns on this particular person. Because if, for instance, if the company is highly product-oriented, customer-focused, if everyone has to be a product developer and really understand the usage scenarios of the product, so if you have a technology geek, which is driven only by the technology, then it's really hard to align. Then these people, to find the common ground for them, it's really hard. So usually it's good to separate them, maybe to look for a team which will help this person achieve more or make himself useful in a better way. But this alignment is very, very important. This is how people struggle when they have different priorities. Everyone feels very, very busy. Everyone feels like gives his or her best effort, but the overall outcome is worse than expected.
According to the survey, the ones who work overtime, most are engineering managers. How is it in your case? Do you have time after work to read books, to meditate?
I'm quite good in time management. I'm not surprised that engineering managers do a lot of overtime. It's like a part of the development cycle. It's really hard to stop being an individual contributor and to start being a leader. You have to stop doing things yourself, at least majority of things. You have to learn how to delegate. You have to learn how to help everyone. You have to learn where to make this leverage, when to make this impact, when to invest how much of your time. So usually people who are highly motivated to want to do as much as possible, and then they span too thinly, then they span on a huge area. They try to make a huge impact, but they just frustrate themselves. So it's part of the development cycle. It's something they have to learn somehow. In general, plenty of organizations are still learning to use engineering managers, are still learning to properly develop this role, and not every candidate is a proper candidate here. Some people get very quickly disappointed and they get back to the individual contributor position. Some people decide that it's okay, but dealing with people is hard, so they would like to be just with technology. So for instance, they would like to move the higher level of higher conceptual level, but deal just with architecture. They would like to be architects. They would like to, for instance, design bigger systems, design things that are more impactful, more important, but do not deal with people that much. And it takes them some time to actually learn, to actually get to this conclusion. So this is how it happens in the end. This is what happens in the end. You have to pay your overtime price for that.
Mm-hmm. I asked you before about the things, the technologies or methodologies or whatever that are overhyped. But on the other hand, do you see something that is not that is under the radar at the moment, something that is not noticed in the surveys like this or some trends?
But just in terms of technology or in general?
In general. Or methodology or...
I think that I don't find any particular technology that would be underrated. I think that what I really don't like is that we tend to be copycats in so many cases. So we tend to copy some solutions directly and think that they've worked for organization X, so they will surely work for us. So I think that people are too afraid to actually try to increase their own awareness and understand how things work. But this really requires some kind of openness regarding communication, understanding the whole organization. So what I truly believe is that things should be simple. So for instance, I'm not kind of a huge complex organizational frameworks like Safe, Scale, Agile framework, and so on. I consider myself a lean person, so I believe in simple solutions, in a simple flow of work, in visualizing the work, in the communication, in balancing synchronous and asynchronous way. And I think that in many cases, we as developers, we as engineers try to be super efficient, but we forget that it's important to be super effective. So we keep ourselves super busy, but we forget that the actual flow of work and flow of value is more important. So we are focused on technology. We get to the problems we feel comfortable with, the technology problems, and we forget that we are here to solve real work problems, which are usually not about the technology. So we forget that sometimes one single hour of discussion can solve problems we spent months of development on. So answering your question, I think that we undervalue direct communication, visualization of work, brainstorming in front of the white table, simple notations like circles and boxes, ubiquitous language, so sharing the same terminology and modeling in terms of building a conceptual model we share together with business people that corresponds to our solution in the end. These are the very basic things. I haven't invented them. The world haven't invented them in the last year or two. These things are with us for decades. But right now we are so focused on the technological details that we completely forget this basic stuff. And I think that 10 years ago or 15 years ago, we were somehow trained, for instance, during our university studies, to go through this whole curriculum, basic curriculum of modeling and so on and so on. It was not very, very inventive, but we were somehow trained to learn these things. And right now, developers are given more freedom how to, for instance, compose their education. Many miss the formal computer science education, so it's even harder to actually teach people to deal with this basic stuff on a daily basis. I'm not sure whether you are satisfied with the answer, but this is how I perceive it.
Yes, a lot. So I like this idea of coming back to the basics and not being too overwhelmed by the multitude of novelties that's coming around. Okay, I've run out of all the questions. Sebastian, thank you very much for accepting the invitation. It was a great pleasure to meet you personally and finally to know you from a conversation, a person-to-person conversation, rather than reading your blog. But I will continue to read your blog, and I once again encourage all of you to have a look at this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.